Hailing frequencies open, and welcome to Enterprising Individuals, the Star Trek discussion podcast that boldly goes into excruciating detail about the series, characters, and stories of the Star Trek universe. I'm your host, Aaron Coker, aka Caliban, and revenge is a dish best served cold, which makes vichyssoise the most retaliatory of soups. That was a voice from the past. It was me from episode 7.2, where I spoke with New York Times bestselling author David R. George III about the film Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan. You're going to hear a lot of voices from the past in this episode because it's our annual year-end clip show, a Clipmas Carol, where we look back at the year that was, take stock of where we are now, and get just a little glimpse of the future yet to come. And we do it all in one episode. We can do anything we like. Of course we can. It's called editing. This year on the show, we finally tackled the films of the Star Trek franchise, going from the motion picture all the way to Star Trek Beyond, and we've got a selection of clips from those discussions. But these are the shadows of shows that have been, and we begin our look back with a clip from our first episode of the year, on which I spoke with Pete the Retailer of the Star Wars Minute podcast, and we talked about whether Decker was the real main character of Star Trek the Motion Picture, and if Decker and Kirk could have switched roles in that story. You know, it almost feels like, I'm not sure who the star of the film is. Possibly it's V'ger. I've heard people say that it's really kind of Decker's story in a way, and I don't think that the movie focuses really enough on Decker for it to be his story. Maybe that's probably one of the problems of the film, is that it's a little too scattered in its presentation, but it is certainly an interesting idea that Decker becomes this, you know, future not in a way, this explorer that in a way that like Kirk can never really touch. Like we don't know. He literally transcends, you know, the bonds of our universe. He becomes something else. You know, we don't really know, but that is the stated mission of the Enterprise and of Starfleet.
Yeah. I wonder how much, like at any point did they consider basically swapping the role of Decker and Kirk in this, Decker's this, guy thinks he's, in command, but he's got a lot to learn. And, here comes Kirk to kind of, ruffle his feathers a little bit by taking over and then, but by the end, then like, I can't imagine that they didn't even consider, at least from Shatner's point of view, like, okay, at the end of the movie, I get the girl and I go out in a giant blaze of glory. Like if they had Kirk doing that, and setting up that, like, okay, Decker had a lot to learn and now he knows more about command. So it's his ship now, for the future.
Kirk becomes the star child.
Exactly. And like, I wonder if they had considered that, because it seems like the DNA is there for them to set up that kind of a storyline. But again, there's a lot of little things that are just left not unexplored, but I would like to know more about.
New York Times bestselling author David Mack returned again to the program for episode 7.3, where we talked about Star Trek III, The Search for Spock, and David expressed the idea that the Trek films are where we see the TOS crew blossom as a family. Well, we've got all these actors. We have to, give them all something to do, let their personalities shine through. And it also makes it more poignant that that many people are trying to save this person, not just like his best friend, Captain Kirk.
Right. I mean, it's also just good screenwriting to have even the supporting cast give each character a moment that defines who they are, to make them memorable, make them come alive. And it also increases our perception of them as a family, as a unit who have served together for, decades at this point. They are bonded. They are bonded through, blood and fire. They've been through baptisms of fire together, these people. You can't take that away. I mean, so you've got this whole notion of, the family, and we see it when, we saw echoes of this in the first movie with, Kirk and his birthday party. Whereas here, when they're, raising the toast to Spock,
to absent friends.
He has them all over. Now, the people who've been through the crucible together, they're seeing them in that setting, in that home setting. It's the perception of, this is his family. Yeah, he has them in his home. These people are his home.
To the point where by Star Trek VI, they're still doing it, but sometimes it's reduced to, I bought a boat. It's like, okay, we know something more about Scotty now in the sixth movie.
Maybe not quite as poignant, but
I spoke once more with Adam and Ben from the Greatest Generation podcast on episode 745 about the history of Trek and the perception of some fans that early Trek is problematic.
You go back 5 years and you run into that. Like, things are an artifact of their times.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And, what the original series was doing, I think it was doing the best that it could at the time. I'd say any given episode of The Big Bang Theory is probably more problematic than a TOS episode.
Well, I mean, I think ourself not excluded. Like, our own show has evolved over the years that we've made it in terms of some of the things that we've said and how we've said them. So,
yeah.
I mean, we're no stranger to that sensibility.
And learning as you go, like if we weren't learning as we went, then I don't think our show would be interesting.
Right.
Like we'd either be so far ahead of the audience in terms of how we present it that it wouldn't be appealing, or so far behind that we would just be like knuckle dragging racist that nobody should listen to anyways,
Yeah, I grew up like you guys probably did watching 1980s films, and it's like the things that they say and do in 1980s films you just can't do now. So, and for good reason.
It's really amazing the stuff that we watched as kids that in retrospect is just like fascist propaganda.
Yeah.
That's why I own all that stuff on physical media now.
So you can hold on to it.
Can't cancel that.
He always hides it when I come over to his house because I'm always proposing DVD burning sessions.
Joe Mazel of the ABCD TOS podcast bravely joined me on episode 7.5 to discuss the merits of Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, and the film's sometimes half-baked presentation of the concept of Shakari. He says Shakari, and some other characters seem to know what he's talking about. So clearly, this is, a legend that exists in some corners of the universe. And then he equates it to the idea of Eden, or Tovakor, and other paradises. But yeah, where did that idea come from? Has the evil entity been sending these waves out for years, for centuries, trying to get people to come in to him? And who put the galactic barrier up? Again, I'm sure this is all answered in some book somewhere, sometime now.
Well, I mean, but you bring up a good point. But there's one of these things we never find out other than. Well, 2 points. We never find out what exactly God is. And, you could have 2 sentences to the effect of, I was a celestial being of the Gamma Quadrant who was, betrayed by my brother gods and, placed behind this great barrier so I could never, murder people again. I don't, but, something would be nice. But you don't really get that. And you also, on the converse of that, you have, wow, it's kind of weird that William Shatner is very specific about what God can and cannot do. I'm God. Well, how come you don't know my name? Why would I?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Why? Because the Bible says I should,
Yeah.
Did the Bible also talk about the Great Barrier? Okay, no. So why are you bothering me about this?
I need a starship because it'd be weird to see, Jesus wouldn't fly around outside the Enterprise. He wants to walk among you, right? So
because I sprung a leak in my space boat, Captain.
Actually, I think I know why he wants the starship, because he wants to join with it. He's going to have sex with that starship. Is what he's going to do. That's what this is really about. It's a booty call.
Yes, that would do it.
On episode 7.7, Mikan Hana of the Sailor Noob podcast came back to the show to talk about Star Trek Generations and the downsides of having a scared robot.
I just feel bad for him because he's kind of like the put upon friend that he just kind of has to put up with what are Data's antics right now, and he's experiencing comedy. I don't want to who breaks a butterfly on a wheel,
Who breaks a butterfly with a clown nose on a wheel? Exactly. Who breaks a butterfly on a calliope?
Aww. This is something that came up on Data's emotion chip is something that came up on talking about mental health being portrayed in TV and media.
Huh. Like in an article?
Like at a panel that I was on. Ooh. And I think that it's an interesting thing to bring up because wouldn't we all like to take out our emotion chip? If
that's
our
the next
emotions,
movie. Don't get ahead of us.
Right, where it gets to be too much or whatever, but he gets told, courage as an emotion too, and he gets sympathized with. He doesn't get belittled for what he's feeling, which I think is good, and it's recognized what he's going through.
And it's scary. Like, he's never felt fear. It's literally scary.
It's very scary.
When Dr. Soren, cold cocks Glassjaw Geordi.
Yeah.
And then pulls a gun on Data. Data's like, oh, I could get shot. This is really scary.
This is very scary.
And Soren didn't know that Data's emotion chip had been activated. He kind of lucked out. Because if that hadn't been true, Data just pulls his head off and there's no movie.
Yeah, you're absolutely
but instead,
right.
It worked out. So that a scared robot. Neat.
Yeah.
This is going to be easy.
I know. And like he takes Geordi as like hostage, and I'm not really sure, like maybe just so they wouldn't like hurt him or hurt Soren or whatever.
It only really works out for the Klingon, the sister, the Duras sisters.
Yeah.
Who he shows absolutely no regard for throughout the entire film.
Oh, none. But they seem to like that.
Well, I guess.
Like
but there is no reason to take Geordi. Maybe he just thought as a hostage it'd be a good idea.
That's what I think.
And then being a person who, I just beam him into space, who cares, or throw him out, out with the trash. But like maybe being a person who's like, well, I don't want to kill this idiot. Like, there's nowhere to beam him now because we need to flee this system, and the observatory is about to become space dust. Yes. So now we're stuck with this guy. I guess we could just drop him off on a planet or something.
Right.
And then, of course, it comes full circle at the end where, a scene that is dumb and Brent Spiner apparently hated. Shut up, Brent Spiner. But where they find Spot, and they're going through the wreckage. And Data starts the scene by saying, I think I've got these emotions pretty figured out at this point. Nothing's going to throw me. And then he finds his cat and he starts crying. And he's like, it's broken. It's broken. So it's like just showing like the journey's going to continue.
Yeah, and I like that.
Sasha Wood of Casually Comics returned to the podcast for episode 7.9 for a discussion of Star Trek Insurrection, and I took the opportunity to ask her what kids really thought about kid characters in Star Trek. Do kids like watching kids, or do they like watching adults?
It depends if the kid's annoying or not.
Okay.
It
so
100%...
even kids are like, oh, this kid, no.
No, like we were watching Sailor Moon, and she turned to me and she was like, I like everybody except Sailor Moon. And I was like, why?
Oh, no.
And she was like, because she cries all the time. And it's annoying.
I can't be friends with your daughter. Well, explain to her when she's older that she has a long character arc. It takes 5 years. Well, actually 4 years because they repeat 1 year. But yeah, she becomes stronger as it goes on. That's interesting because I always, I liked Luke Skywalker, who is a kid ostensibly, I suppose, a teenager. And then George Lucas is like, no, Anakin's got to be a little kid. And I'm like, little kids don't care about little kids. They like, adults.
They like people who are cool or who they think are interesting. Like she didn't mind the little boy in the movie, but she wasn't as interested in him as she was in Data. Because he's like a machine. And so she was like, well, he's like a robot and stuff. Like that was way more interesting to her than, a little kid.
Yeah, having little kids in your narrative, that's a TNG thing as well. I could go back and see how many of those TNG kid episodes Michael Piller was involved in. But usually when you see a kid on TNG, you're like, we're in for a ride here.
This kid is pretty good.
He's okay. Yeah. And also it's definitely, let's give Brent Spiner something to do because he doesn't want to do this movie, period.
No, he didn't. He wanted to die. He wanted to be killed off.
That's right. Yeah. He got Rick Berman to promise that he'd kill him, and then when the final script came, Berman attached a note saying, I'll kill you next time. Sorry about that. It seems like we're never going to get a Star Trek 4 at this point, so on episode 710.5, I sat down with Gooey Fame of the Virtual Theater podcast for a no-holds-barred writing session for our own treatment for a fourth Kelvin film.
And so, then you can have a part where they're like, okay, well, you're going to need a team. And then he's got to go call up, I'm going to get my team. And he's got to call Sulu. He's got to convince Spock to come. He's apprehensive, right?
Right.
And then he can drop in hints like, oh, this used to be my family. I lost my father when I was young, and I ended up, this ended up being the family that I found, and now they're all gone, and I'm trying to bring them back together to do this thing.
Yeah.
You could have a scene like in Fast Five where Spock and Kirk are talking like Paul Walker and Vin on the porch drinking Coronas, where he's like, I remember everything about my father or whatever. And then they do the heist, and who do they run into but his dang father?
Okay,
and,
yeah.
And he's like, what? I had to go and do all this stuff, and you're still alive, you know?
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah, and Spock can talk about his father. You know, presumably
Yes.
Sarek would have passed away at this point. Yeah. It's all about fathers. We are making this into Fast and Furious.
They did it already.
And so early third act reveal then is that obviously George Kirk is amenable to this. He's been actually fighting. People have been fighting in his name. He's been trying to stop them the whole time. And the real bad guy is his Klingon son, Sam Kirk.
Yes. Sam Kirk. Okay. Right. Perfect.
So
I love this.
So the final showdown, the only real ship battle we'll have is Sam Kirk against Jim Kirk.
That's awesome, and we'll have maybe some new aliens in there. They can do something cool.
Yeah.
Maybe they would do just like a thing where they're like, let's bring back some guys they remember, and maybe it's like Andorians, you know?
Yeah, or Cations, or or the Kzinti, or something like that.
Oh yeah, and there's got to be
the budget for that.
Enterprise references got to be there. If we could get someone from Enterprise to even show up, that's got to happen.
Yeah.
Archer's still alive too.
Yeah, I think probably Mayweather would have the best chance of being alive still. But yeah, I could do that.
That's Star Trek 7. They'll do that.
And finally, on episode 7.12, Darren Mooney returned once again to the podcast to talk about Star Trek Into Darkness and the often alienating process of being your own podcast editor. There's an element as well of reading something or hearing something read rather than reading it off the page. You know, much has been made of the fact that it's hard to get nuance from something, a tweet or an article, to get the emotional intent of the author. But when you have to write something and then read it and people hear it on YouTube, I would imagine that not only is the audience bigger on YouTube, but people are responding specifically to you and your inflection and what you're saying rather than just reading an article and saying, I don't know if I agree with that, or yeah, I do.
That guy seems to have disappeared up various parts of his own anatomy.
Right, yeah.
I'm always very cautious about that because again, anybody will tell you that they hate their own voice. I don't mean to project onto you, Aaron, but like most people I talk to are like, I hate the sound of my own voice. And I honestly do. I have a very high-pitched voice. It can be very shrill. I worry sometimes that I'm not very good at communicating intent. I'm told I can be very deadpan, very serious, that I come across as somebody who takes himself very seriously when I'm very much not doing that all the time. I was admittedly very, very sensitive about that. And I will actually go back. Well, I won't go back. I don't listen to myself. I try not to listen to myself. I have to do it on the video edits because obviously that's a constructive process where you're like, I'd like if we could cut this bit or trim this bit, or if you could pause there. That sort of stuff you have to. And at the end of the process, you're like, the work that the video editors do is amazing, but I never want to hear my own voice again. And there have been cases where I've gone back and like people have pointed to old videos that I've done, and I don't think I'm particularly good at it now, but I think that when I go back and I listen to the early video recordings that I did, I'm very stilted. I'm very uncomfortable on mic. And I will credit in particular Omar Ahmed for making me more comfortable on mic and kind of like talking me through how things come across, how they work, what editors need, how flow in particular works. Because again, if you're reading a piece, it's very different to what we're doing at the moment, which is kind of extemporizing and kind of talking casually, which is a lot easier. But if you're reading something you've written, hitting the right tone, hitting the right note, hitting the right cadence, pausing in the right places can be very difficult, and obviously, as you said, can fundamentally change the meaning of what you're saying in ways that can perhaps be provocative and misconstrued. It's an interesting medium. I'm still getting used to it. I'm not quite like Lal in The Offspring. Without understanding YouTube, I have somehow mastered it. I do not understand YouTube, and I certainly have not mastered it, but we're getting there.
I have a mouth and I am screaming. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, in my early days as an actor and a voice actor, I hated seeing myself on screen or hearing myself. But at this point, as a podcaster, it's just a drone to me. I don't even really register it as my own voice anymore. I'm just an editor who's just going, why'd he say that? Cut that out. And so, yeah, you get there eventually.
Yeah. Now, editing yourself in a podcast is like, how much of myself can I cut out when they still remain coherent?
How much of myself can anyone take? Because I've had enough. And that is it for this year of Enterprising Individuals. Like the ghost of Christmas Present, it seemed to bust onto the scene, age rapidly, and say goodbye too soon. It's been an interesting journey covering all of the films in order, and I want to give a big shout out to all of our guests this year and the insights that they brought to the show. Did I learn anything from this process? It's hard to say. It was certainly a revelation to look at not only the films, but the behind-the-scenes work that led to their creation. I think in a lot of ways, even though we all, love the good Trek films, and maybe we even love the bad ones a little bit, it's fascinating how close we came to not having any Star Trek films. For every film, for the most part, there was a point, be it a lack of box office returns on the previous film, or a change-up in studio leadership, or just trying to find the right script, the right story to tell. There's a point that every Star Trek film could have just as easily not have been made. And I think it's, of course, down to, the money that the films make, but also the great love that the audience has for this franchise and the great devotion that the cast and the crew and the behind-the-scenes people have for telling stories in this world. I can say truthfully that I love every one of the Star Trek films, and I wouldn't trade them for anything. And we got a new and better remaster of the motion picture this year. So things just keep getting better and better. And I think that we're really lucky as a fan base. And then there's Star Trek IV, the Kelvin Star Trek IV. It's funny. We've talked about the possibility of a Star Trek IV with Chris Pine and Zachary Quinto and crew a lot this year. That's come up a bunch of times. There's, of course, the pitch that Gui and I worked on in our special episode. But it seems like a Star Trek IV is getting further and further away all the time. And, we had some specific rug pulls in that direction just this year. I truly do believe that we will get a Star Trek IV someday soon, and not just a cynical reboot to keep the rights or whatever. I think that Paramount and Viacom CBS are currently, they're in a phase that's kind of the opposite of what Marvel was experiencing in the last decade or so, where, or before that, where Marvel cartoons and like non-big screen media had been popular for years. There's always like a Iron Man or an Avengers cartoon or something like that, but it just seems like there was never going to be like a real Marvel movie until Iron Man. And that really changed everything. And now there's just a ton of Marvel movies, and only now are they saying, well, maybe we could do TV shows as well. And that's starting to grow on that side. I think right now Paramount is really focusing on the TV side because they're really killing it there. Like the TV business for them is doing great. So motion pictures have now gone on the back burner for the time being. But Paramount is a major motion picture studio. They still make big and successful movies all the time. And I think that we need only wait for the right time and the right creator to see Star Trek return once again to the big screen. And here's hoping that that happens sooner rather than later. But that's it for our year of Star Trek films. 2022, like 2021 before it, and 2020 and 2019, et cetera, they've all been weird years. But I'm glad that we were able to persist in making this show, and I hope that it helped you personally. And now it's time to meet the last of our three ghosts, the ghost of podcast yet to come. This podcast, Enterprising Individuals, has existed now for almost 7 calendar years and for 7 seasons. When we first started out, and somebody asked me how long I planned to go with the podcast, I joked that, I at least wanted to make it longer than Star Trek Enterprise, 4 seasons. And once that happened, we got to 5, I started thinking more seriously about the future of the podcast. And it wasn't really intentional at first, but as the show went on, I really did start to think of it as being similar in structure to a traditional TV show, a traditional Star Trek show, a season with 20 or so episodes every year. And of course, for this show, for the most part, we had a main episode and then on the off week, a supplemental episode. So it was more like we were doing nearly 50 episodes a year, which is, a lot. And we've finally reached 7 seasons, just like TNG and DS9 and Voyager. It's the perfect Star Trek length. And I think for that reason, it's time to end the podcast for the present time. I've talked to so many people over the years in the world of Star Trek, writers and actors, artists, fans, other podcasters. I've learned so much about Star Trek. Suffice it to say that I enjoyed Star Trek when I started the show, but by the end of it, I was a fan of Star Trek, and I hope that the same has been true for you. But as the show continued, I became much less interested in the details of Star Trek. How many letters of Enterprises there's been, or how many times Riker put his foot up on something, the little facts. And I became way more interested in what Star Trek is really all about. It's a space show about explorers who sometimes get into fights that they're not looking for. That's what happens. But it's about a society that has finally solved all of its problems by maximizing their empathy. They're a society that has decided to leave no one behind, to eliminate all scarcity and inequality, and to do their best to share that success with anyone who wants it. Now, of course, the Federation is a fictional society, but so is every idea until we make it manifest. I mean, Pandora didn't exist, so James Cameron had to create it, right? So at the end of this journey, I've become way more occupied in how Trek represents and often fails to represent the ideals that we really want for ourselves, and which, for a variety of reasons, we are unable to make manifest in our own societies. And that's what I want to talk about. Indeed, this podcast has become much more about the exploration of those ideas as the years go on. But I think that exploration, that is the exploration of how those ideals are evinced in the world of Star Trek and how we can pursue them in our own world, that exploration is the next step for me. So this will be the last episode of Enterprising Individuals in its current form. I'll be going offline to continue to develop the ideas that I have for an entirely new podcast that will examine the interaction between the ideals of Star Trek and our current socio-political reality. Title pending, but it'll have to have a really good title to make that sound interesting. The show as it exists now will continue to exist on iTunes or your listening platform of choice, so don't unsubscribe from it just yet. You'll have access to the entire backlog of the show on your listening platform, and in the future, I will provide you with updates about the direction the new project is taking on that feed, so stay subscribed. We'll also for now be continuing Star Trek Discoverage, our weekly recap and discussion of the latest Star Trek episodes, which streams on twitch.tv/EISTPOD every Thursday night at 8 p.m. Central. Those episodes will also continue to appear after air on this feed as well. And of course, in the near future, we will be relaunching with an entirely new direction, and I'll be keeping you updated on the progress of that, and those episodes will appear in this current feed. So stay subscribed so you get those. I'll be suspending Patreon payments going forward for 2023, so if you're a patron, and I think I understand this right, what you can do on Patreon, I can suspend the payments. You should still have access to all the material on Patreon, but you're not being charged going forward. Let me know if this isn't the case. If you lose access, let me know on Patreon or at eistpod@gmail.com, and I will find a way to make everything available at no cost to you. I want to thank my patrons specifically for their long-term support through the years. I mean, really, thank you so much. It may not seem like it helps all that much, a little bit every month, but it really does. Long-term listeners may remember that we went through some early growing pains when we were having equipment failures and technical problems. I replaced an entire laptop throughout the run of the show without barely missing a week or two. And the patron contributions really saved the show in those instances. Plus, whenever we did a live show or we traveled to conventions or made any kind of expenses, the support of the patrons was really crucial. So thanks for that. I want to say a special thanks to our latest patron, Ensign Antipodalnaut, who just signed up and of course didn't know that we were planning to sundown the show. But thanks for subscribing, and I hope that you enjoy the wealth of extra content on the Patreon. If you're a current patron and you're thinking about unsubscribing, I don't blame you. I will be keeping listeners updated on the main show feed here. But with more bandwidth in my schedule, with the end of weekly production of Enterprising Individuals, I do plan on returning to doing episode recaps on the Patreon and publishing the rest of the outtakes and extended conversations. So if you want to hear those, stay subscribed, and I will, of course, let you know in advance if and when I plan on resuming billing for the Patreon. Is that it? Is that all there is? God bless us, everyone. Were we doing a Charles Dickens thing? Like Scrooge, my life has been completely changed by the moments that I've had working on this podcast, and I could fill an entirely different podcast with reminiscences and stories about the friends that I've made and the experiences that I've had thanks to Enterprising Individuals. I got to meet Connor Trenier. What else is there to say? Except thank you to everyone who has listened and followed the show and left kind comments or come up and said hello during a convention. Be assured that I will still be around the Trek community, both online and in real space, so don't hesitate to say hello if you run into me. And of course, stay tuned for the next evolution of Enterprising Individuals in the coming weeks. Until then, a belated Merry Christmas and a Happy Holidays and a Happy New Year to you and yours. Be good to each other. God bless us, everyone. Have a great 2023. And with that, we're signing off and saying live long and prosper. BackTrekking is back for an all-new season. Hi, I'm Caliban.
And I'm Gooey Fame.
And we'd like to introduce you to BackTrekking, the podcast that explores the real-world inspirations behind your favorite episodes of Star Trek.
From historical events to classical literature to blockbuster films, we go where no pod has gone before to seek out the origins of classic Trek tales.
Did you know, Gooey, that the TNG episode Too Short a Season was an allegory for the Iran-Contra affair?
Yeah, only sweatier. Did you know that the Enterprise episode Regeneration was an homage to the John Carpenter film The Thing?
Archer and T'Pol freezing to death over a bottle of whiskey would have been a controversial ending.
As a dog lover, Archer would not like The Thing, I'm guessing.
Oh my god, movie night is canceled. Join us every other Thursday for a journey back to the beginnings of the Trek universe.
BackTrekking is available wherever you get your podcasts.
No, Porthos!